Hi, my name is Dr. Jeremy Shaft. I'm a board-certified chiropractor, and today I wanted to talk to you about the spike protein and the potential for damage that it can cause on its own, apart from the virus. And why this is important is because that can happen potentially through the vaccines that are being offered right now for COVID-19. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between the virus and the disease. So very often people will interchangeably use SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 as the same thing, but they're not. It's not the COVID virus, it's the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's the name of the virus, and it causes COVID-19, or is thought to cause COVID-19. And then the opposite, COVID-19, is the set of processes that make up the disease that is thought to be caused by SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, COVID-19 is the disease, and that's important because severe COVID-19 can be caused by the spike protein alone, and that can be very bad considering everybody in the world is getting vaccinated with something that produces the spike protein. All right, so this is a cross-section of the coronavirus. So if we back up here, we just see, so your coronavirus, here's the spikes right here, these little red things, okay? So here's a cross-section of that. So the yellow ones are the spikes here, and this is the RNA of the virus, and then you got some other proteins around there, okay? So when the virus comes into the cell, it opens up, and then the RNA spills out, and that's how you are infected, and your body produces new viruses from there. So about the spike a little bit, I was just looking at some images of it and trying to find out more about it, and found this interesting thing. They said that when they determined its structure and its function, it looks like a Demogorgon from Stranger Things. And so I just thought that was cool, and especially because it causes a lot of havoc, that they call it the Demogorgon. That's probably very apropos. So okay, so now we have a little, so this is what happens when you were infected with SARS-CoV-2. So these are cells here. For today's discussion, they're endothelial cells. Any cells can be infected by the virus, typically if it has ACE2 receptors on it, but for our discussions, endothelial cells. So these are ACE2 membrane receptors, and this would be the bloodstream here, okay? So what happens when the virus comes in, there's the virus, and it attaches to an ACE2. It binds at the spike. That's what the little red guys are there. Those are the spikes. And it binds, and then it's endocytosed, or taken into the cell. And then at that point, it opens itself up and starts spewing out its RNA so that it can produce more viruses, okay? The next, or in that process, your body is producing all these proteins. That's how it produces the viruses. Your body actually produces all the proteins. And then part of the proteins are actually presented on the cell membrane surface so that your body's immune defenses can come along and say whether you're okay or not. It's like, you let people know you're fine, at night. At like certain, at my grandma's place, they used to, check on all the old ladies at night and make sure they were all okay. That's kind of what's happening here. Your body is checking on to make sure, are these cells still our cells, or have they been invaded, and do we need to kill them? Okay, so when your immune system comes across, they'll see these and they'll attach onto it, and that's how antibodies are produced. And so your body is trying to tell it, this mechanism is there to defend you against infection. So during the process of all of this, those spikes will be lost to the bloodstream, whether it's due to the cell actually being killed because it's been infected, or the spikes can shed on their own in other manners. Doesn't matter, the spike gets into the bloodstream and then it docks with ACE2 receptors apart from the virus, okay? This creates endothelial dysfunction, which is increased blood pressure, cytokine storm, blood clots, thrombosis, skin rash, stroke, brain damage, death. All the horrible things that cause severe COVID-19 are caused by the spike apart from the virus attaching to ACE2 and causing this endothelial dysfunction. So why is endothelial dysfunction important, or beyond what we're talking about here, is that you've probably heard that pretty much everybody that dies or has a severe case of COVID has pre-existing conditions. And you'll hear heart disease, diabetes, obesity, some lung disorders. all of those are what predispose you to having a bad case. Well, all of those are endothelial dysfunction-based diseases. So you already have endothelial dysfunction coming in, you get COVID, your body's trying to fight it. In the process, the spikes get broken loose, they get into this bloodstream, and then it attaches to your ACE2, and you already don't have enough there, so you're already dysfunctional, and it makes what's left dysfunctional, and it sets you over the edge. And so that's the main mechanism of why people are having such severe responses to COVID when they have these pre-existing conditions. So, like I said in the beginning a little bit, severe COVID-19 is largely due to the effects of the spike apart from the virus on its own in the periphery, okay? All of the COVID-19 vaccines that are being produced and they're using right now all produce the spike protein. That's the purpose of them. That's how they work. They actually produce the spike protein, and it presents itself on the cell membrane just like an infected cell does, but this is actually called transfection. I'll show you that in a second. So it's very, very similar to the same situation you're in when you have an infection, just a little bit different. So let's take a look. Same thing, we got the cells. So instead of the virus coming across, we'll have lipid nanoparticles. And so what we're showing is the mRNA vaccine. So this would be Pfizer or Moderna. And so we got the lipid particles. So what they do is they surrounded the RNA inside there, and so that it doesn't get killed off by your body, and your body, doesn't see this as a bad thing necessarily, and it comes in and it fuses with the membrane and opens up a pore and allows the contents to be dumped inside. So now inside the cell you have the synthetic mRNA, and that synthetic mRNA is then what sends signals to your ribosomes, or the machinery that creates proteins in your body, and it starts creating the spike protein. And it presents on the surface, like we said. Same thing that happened before, those spikes break free and they bind with ACE2, and they cause all the exact same things of severe COVID-19, endothelial dysfunction, increased blood pressure, cytokine storm, blood clots, on and on and on. Okay, so this is not something that is specifically due to COVID. I mean, the spike binding is, but endothelial dysfunction is a well-known, well-studied problem, and we know, what causes it. And so that's how we'd be able to find out when we see this. We're like, wow, this is exactly the same thing. We're looking at an extended disease process that people are already dealing with, which is why those people are dying of it. So this image here, that didn't come out very clear up there. So this image is to show this is actually an image from a study that they did for the ChAdOx vaccine, which was the AstraZeneca, which, by the way, has been, I don't know if it's been fully pulled or if it's just on hold. I'm not exactly sure, but there's been blood clotting issues. If you back up and remember, here we see blood clots, right? Endothelial dysfunction causes blood clots. Spikes binding to the ACE2 cause endothelial dysfunction. So anyways, but this image is what they had in the article, and it shows that they actually took pictures, and it shows the spikes that presented on the cell surface to be almost identical to real spikes from the coronavirus. And so it just shows you that here. In this case, the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer are DNA-based vaccines. And so what they have is they have a modified adenovirus. So they've taken a virus, they've created a virus and synthesized it. And they added some different pieces to it so that it wouldn't be infective, supposedly. And inside there is the DNA to produce the spike protein. So the virus comes and attacks your cell. It infects it with the DNA to produce the spike, and then your body produces the spikes, and that's what we have here. So just a little bit on the endothelium here, just to give you an idea where we are and what we're looking at. So the endothelium, those endothelial cells I showed you just a minute ago, is the very innermost lining of your blood vessels, all of your blood vessels, your arteries, your veins, and your capillaries, your microvessels, okay? It's the very innermost lining, and it's very, very important because it's what largely regulates blood pressure, clotting, all these things that we just showed you are part of its normal function. It's actually the second largest organ in the body. So very, very important. And again, heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States, and endothelial dysfunction is the root cause of heart disease. So just showing you what the outcome of the virus can be, and also the spike. This is from a University of Miami Health, and they were just showing you that when the SARS can bind with one of these receptors, there are other receptors that can bind it, but we're talking about ACE today. It causes dysfunction in the endothelial cells, which can lead to hypertension, diabetes, neurological diseases, kidney disease, thrombosis, all of those things that we were talking about here. So that's my basic explanation of how it works. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of data from the literature just to give you an idea that I'm not making this up. In fact, I have a much, much longer presentation that I've made that you can check out if you're interested in, where we go into depth on all the problems here and ultimately trying to find some solutions on maybe how we can stop the spike from binding to ACE2 and prevent these negative effects in both people that have taken the vaccine and who are dealing with a live virus on its own. And by the way, for people that don't have that as an issue, just generally people that are dealing with heart disease, diabetes, neurological disorders, kidney disease, and thrombotic disorders, all these issues that plague America and the West largely can be fixed largely by the same things that will help prevent you from getting the virus or having a negative outcome from the vaccine. Okay, so, all right, so this is from the Journal of Neurovirology. And what they say is that, on the other hand, spilling of viral particles, antigenic proteins, and debris from injured infected cells. So remember I told you back there, my little animation showed you that when those cells are infected, eventually they're going to be killed. And when that happens, then all these proteins that were there, part of the virus, get broken off. And they get into into the bloodstream, and then it goes, and those get down to other endothelial cells and cause havoc, okay? These can represent risk factors for thrombosis. Thrombosis is blood clotting, by the way. For example, it's known that free RNA released after cell injury into the bloodstream can initiate thrombosis. In patients with COVID-19, viral proteins and RNA, as well as cellular debris, after cytolytic destruction of endothelial cells, so that's when your body has killed those cells because they're showing that they're foreign and they're bad, this can present a significant risk for coagulopathy and stroke. So, right here, the particles on its own can cause coagulopathy, stroke, blood clotting. Not good. And when you see anything in purple, by the way, is always my writing in these slides you see with these borders on them. I'm just reminding you that this is the exact same state that you're going to be in if you take this vaccine. All right, so we also know that the spike protein alone can alter the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is a form of endothelial cell, actually, and its purpose is to keep stuff out of the brain that shouldn't get in there, like viruses and toxins and other things that could damage your brain. The spike alone, on its own, without the virus, whether produced from the live virus or potentially from the vaccine, is a potent inductor of endothelial dysfunction, and that manifestations of COVID-19 shock syndrome in children can be at least partially attributed to its action. So, as a side note here, COVID is basically a cold to people under the age of 50. And really, even mostly under the age of 70, it's not a big deal, by and large. I mean, there's a few cases where people have had severe reactions, but for the most part, it's not a huge thing. So now what we're doing, though, is we are going to give these untested, never before used vaccines that are really a form of gene therapy. We're going to give them to the entire world's population without ever being tested, and especially to large portions of the population that aren't actually susceptible to COVID in any real dangerous way. But we're going to give them the spike protein that's going to be in their blood vessels that's going to do the thing that we're trying to prevent it from doing. And we know that the spike on its own actually causes this shock syndrome and stuff. So if we know that that's a problem, why are we giving those kids the same thing? Moving on. Productive viral infection of endothelial cells is not an absolute requirement for endothelial dysfunction. Also, as it can also arrive as a result of viral protein shedding. Like I told you earlier, it can either be shed or during cytolytic destruction. Regardless, through the virus, it breaks off and it's in your body. We've known about this since 2005. These studies are old. They've done it and they've seen, they injected spike into mice and they found that it caused severe acute lung disorders, ARDS, which is what SARS is basically named. Severe acute respiratory syndrome is SARS, and ARDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is what is caused by injecting the spike into the tail of mice. So you're essentially causing the same thing. And here we are just saying that viral shedding on its own is the cause. So this comes from the Journal of Vaccines. This is not a random off-the-wall journal. This is the Journal of Vaccines. In this article, we note that human host cells sensitively respond to the spike protein to elicit cell signaling. So that endothelial dysfunction, when they're talking about cell signaling, that's the same process here. Thus, it's important to be aware that the spike protein produced by the new COVID-19 vaccines may also affect the host cells. Yeah, it's problematic on its own, well known, well before this. We should monitor the long-term consequences of these vaccines very carefully, especially when they're administered to otherwise healthy individuals, just like I was telling you a minute ago. I mean, if everybody was sick and had a chance of dying of this tomorrow, it really was as dangerous as many believe it to be. I mean, if you're under the age of 50, you're like in a 99.95 or 99.97% chance of survival. That's very, very high, okay? Anyways, all right, so here we go. Here's a couple of them that show here in 2005, that's Kuba et al. They injected the spike protein into mice and it caused lung injury. So here we are dealing with this lung injury, and the spike is actually a major portion of what caused that lung injury. Moving on. So the SARS-CoV spike protein without the rest of the viral components has been shown to activate cell signaling. This cell signaling cascade was found to be triggered by the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, downregulating the ACE2 protein expression, like I showed you on my little animation there, subsequently activating the angiotensin II type 1 receptor. So that's the reason that happens, is that angiotensin II type 1 receptor gets activated. And you may have heard of ACE inhibitors, people that, you know, for blood pressure and whatnot. So ACE is, ACE2 is like the second version of ACE. They found it after they found ACE2. And speaking of science being settled, they didn't find out about ACE2 until the year 2000. I graduated chiropractic college in 2004, so it was brand new, if at all, being taught to us at that point. Just to give you an idea of when somebody tells you the science is settled, you can tell them that, we just found out about ACE2 in 2000. All right, so same article here. The angiotensin receptor inhibitor losartan attenuated the spike protein to induce enhancement of lung injury. They were showing that if you stop the binding of spike and ACE2, you can actually help the lungs from being damaged. These experiments using transient transfection may reflect the intracellular effects of the spike protein that could be triggered by the RNA and viral vector-based vaccines. So these experiments that this group did were showing that the same thing could happen from the vaccine, which produces the spike protein, whether it's an RNA base, which is the Moderna and the Pfizer, or it's viral vector base, which is the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. So in conclusion, this is same article. In conclusion, COVID-19 represents a viral infection with limited sites of infectious virions. So the infectiousness of the virus, it pretty much stays in the lungs. It doesn't get beyond the lungs too much. In some cases it does, but for the most part it doesn't. But the deadly sequelae, so the other deadly consequences, due to the effective manner in which the pseudovirions, so pseudovirions are the spike on its own, not part of the virus, in the context of released viral proteins, activate synergistic microvascular pathways of tissue destruction throughout the body. That doesn't sound very good to me. And we moved on already. I don't know how that happened. Let's go back there. What in the... No. Bizarre. All right, tissue destruction throughout the body. I guess I could have moving on there. So finally, the data predicts a favorable response to therapies based on either removal of circulating viral proteins, aka the spike, which is what they're talking about here, and or blunting of the endothelial-induced response. So this is pretty much what we're going to talk about in the next video, is the endothelium and the endothelial response a little bit more in depth. And I just wanted to touch on it today to give you a general overview of it, but just to get the idea that the same thing that's causing severe COVID-19 with the virus is potentially what's causing all of these deaths and clotting disorders and all these things we're seeing in the news with these crazy things happening to people. This may be the mechanism that's causing all of it. If you're interested in more, find my other videos, and if you would like to leave me a message, please email me at jershaft@yahoo.com. That's jershaft@yahoo.com. Thanks for spending the time with me, and we'll see you soon.